wellness, health, psychiatric. She completed her psychiatric training and fellowship at NYU Medical Center after graduating from Cornell University Medical College and has a BS from MIT in systems neuroscience. She is a board certified in integrative holistic medicine and specializes in root cause resolution approach to psychiatric symptoms and symptoms. And her new book, The Truth, Mind of Her Own, The Truth About Depression and How Women Can Heal Their Bodies and Reclaim Their Lives, is coming out March 15th. And then we have Josh here. Dr. Josh acts as a doctor of natural medicine and clinical nutritionist with a passion to help people get healthy by using food as medicine. He founded one of the largest functional medicine clinics in the U.S., located in Nashville, Tennessee, and runs the popular health website Dr. Acts, which receives 6 million visits a month. Insane. His new book, Eat Dirt, which focuses on the root cause of all disease, will be out March 29th. And then we have Dr. Jeff Bland. He's an expert on clinical biochemistry and human nutrition. He founded the Institute for Functional Medicine, which has more than 100,000 health practitioners go through its courses over the past 25 years. Jeff has traveled more than 6 million miles in his career working in collaboration with researchers and global leaders to transform healthcare into patient-centered personalized delivery system. His book, The Disease Delusion, came out in 2014, which focuses on the identification and treatment of the cause of chronic disease. All right, so to kick this off, I have endometriosis, and I was supposed to get a hysterectomy because of it. And before I got a hysterectomy, I decided to try food, and it worked. But a doctor did not tell me that. I figured it out myself. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Blind, because you're the father of functional medicine. Why aren't doctors talking about this?
I think, and Jessica, that's really the question that probably everybody here is wondering about, because we're in a revolution right now. The revolution is that our healthcare system is not really delivering successful remedies to the major problems that we have. It's made tremendous advances in crisis disease, things, cancer, heart disease, bypass surgeries, all sorts of high-tech interventions are very successful, but the walking wounded of the country, which is where 75% of our healthcare expenditures are now allocated, is not really being successfully managed with the medicine that we have, the pill for an ill type mentality. So people have been looking for what are the solutions to this rapidly rising prevalence, not only in the United States but globally, of chronic disease. And chronic disease is things that may not kill you immediately, but they completely kind of steal your quality of life. They make life uncomfortable. They put you on a search for solutions that often you feel very frustrated. You feel like a patient is not really being dealt with in the way that you need to. It leads to disillusionment, kind of advocacy, and eventually what happens is what's happening today. We're witnessing then people looking at things that used to be considered to be kind of outliers, which now may be where the actual solution to the problem lies. What we eat, think, do every day, and how we can be instructed to make these things personal to our own needs, because our genes are unique to ourselves, like the facet and the diamond of life, that there has never been another one exactly like us, nor will ever again. So how do we create in our own world a solution to this problem so that we get the high level of health, the white light of good health that sits in our genes, that just needs to be unearthed when we take the right things off and add the right things to our bodies to create a solution. So diet is a common shared experience, right? I have yet to meet someone that hasn't eaten some time. And therefore, it is one of those things that actually is a modifier over the days, weeks, months, years, and decades of our living, because our food speaks to our genes. And when it speaks to our genes in very remarkable ways, we call it nutrigenomics, it induces in how we look, act, and feel. So your experience, Jessica, I think is one, obviously you're a seeker, you're a person that's willing to explore and willing to test, and that's the way that this movement is happening, one person at a time, saying, I found a solution to something that a drug wasn't going to solve, and I'm not going to stand for this anymore. This is a revolution that we need to spread across the country, actually spread across the world, to reduce the burden of unnecessary disease.
But why aren't doctors talking about it more? I mean, is it something where they're just not educated about it?
Well, just real quickly, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues, who I'm sure have a very insightful comment to make to that. Having taught doctors since a medical school professorship in the 70s when I started, and having the privilege of working for two-time Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling at his institute at Stanford for a couple of years, what I came to recognize is that there is a a view in medicine that you need to know more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing, right? And this is this subspecialty view of medicine that you know, if you keep examining something with greater degrees of complexity so that you know every species of plant in the rainforest, you forget that there is a rainforest, that it all works together. And I think that that training is being resisted right now with the doctors that are coming through school today. It's a very exciting time, by the way. When I started teaching docs, we had 10% of our students were female pre-med and medical students. Today, it's more than 50% of doctors in medical schools in America are women. Secondly, when I went to in medical training, it was all about memorization, learning and reciting. So you learn a list of symptoms that you could then report back, and you were then advanced in your class. If you were really good as a diagnostician, you could memorize well and recite on demand. And then out of that came a kind of a treatment that a monkey could push out of a computer that was basically a standard of care. Today they're training systems biology. They're training that the organs don't just work independently. You don't drop off your liver and then walk away. That your liver connects to the pancreas, connects to your gut, connects to your brain. And so therefore this new training is setting up a revolutionary, I think, cadre of doctors that are going to change medicine. And lastly, I'll just say, if you're very frustrated that medicine doesn't seem to change, I want to remind you that there is a concept called quantum chemistry and quantum theory that was considered a bunch of weirdos back to the turn of the last century, of people that were these mathematical guys like Einstein and Bohr, Dirac and Fermi and so forth, that sat around Max Planck and talked about these weird things, mathematics, that no one understood, no one cared about, had no relevancy to life. And then suddenly it was recognized that, no, maybe this really did have relevancy. It led to semiconductors. It led to the digital revolution that we see today, this whole concept of quantum understanding of our universe. And so when Max Planck finally got the Nobel Prize for his discoveries in quantum chemistry, someone asked him, well, how did it finally change? Because it was so resisted for so many years. And his classic quote was, one funeral at a time. Because the people that were in the power eventually went away and were replaced by the new individuals coming up. And that's what's happening in medicine.
Okay, so Kelly, you have a new book. I got to read it. It is incredible. And it's going to be a little controversial because you are, in a good way, because you are voicing what you have found, that birth control, medicine, toxins are causing depression in women. So did that take some courage to come out with that information? Because we're talking so much about doctors not talking about this. Tell me about that.
I just can't help myself. I've always been a big mouth, so when I think I'm onto something, I have to talk about it. In line with what Jeff was saying, there's a powerful report that talks about how it can take up to 17 years for what is sort of consensus in the medical literature to trickle into a doctor's clinical practice. So we're working in a model that is not representing modern science. And so there are so many conceptual shifts underway, again, as Jeff was saying, that we must move from this very reductionist, dualistic, sort of one pill, one ill model that treats the body as sort of like a bag of parts, right? And notably in my field as a psychiatrist, the head as separate, distinctly from the body, the mind as separate from the brain, all of these sort of compartmentalized areas. And the beauty of what's happening now, this revolution that will be televised, is that it's sort of embracing complexity. And it's even almost a mandate that we begin to think in a more relational way. So as we relate to our environment, as we relate to each other, and as our different systems relate, together. So the science is behind us. We talk in functional medicine a lot about, and this is, Josh's specialty, about the microbiome and our inner ecology. So how many people know what the microbiome is? I've heard that word. Cool. That's very cool. So that's the beauty of the digital era. So you don't need to hear about the microbiome from your doctor because you can figure it out by yourself. And so when I learned, to answer your question, when I began to learn about the potential psychiatric, hormonal, gut-related, immune-related side effects that are in the literature that I did not learn about in medical school, I felt very frustrated, is a nice way to put it, about that fact. And I'm very passionate about informed consent. So informed consent means you go to your doctor, you talk about the possibility of taking a medication, and that doctor is obligated ethically and otherwise to talk to you about the risks, benefits, and alternatives of that intervention. And the trouble is, if the doctor isn't aware, because they haven't done their own research outside of what's been fed to them by the companies that seek to profit from sale of that drug, then they can't fully inform you, right? So the beauty is that you can inform yourself, and that's what I'm trying to set people up for, is to be able to, fully engage in their own treatment.
And how do your patients react when you suggest changing diet over taking a pill?
So I stopped prescribing several years ago, and I think that set the stage. And I'm very conventionally trained. I was, very much, sort of dyed-in-the-wool psychiatrist, very interested in medication-based symptom management. But when I stopped, my prescription became nutrition. That was the first. I don't recommend supplements. I don't recommend much of anything else. 3 minutes of meditation a day, 20 minutes of movement a week, and daily attention and consciousness around diet. It is the deal. You don't get a second appointment if you have not done your 30 days. And when you feature this as a prescription, not as a window dressing to the medication treatment, it actually centers it powerfully. And I think even I'm very interested in the placebo effect, and I think there is a role in sort of what is transmitted from me to the patient in terms of my enthusiasm and passion about this intervention, not only because I put my own Hashimoto's thyroiditis into remission through these very same practices, but because I've seen patient after patient after patient come back after 30 days. These are women who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who've been trashing their bodies for decades. And the fact that in 1 month they can tectonically shift their experience, it's amazing. It's a gift. So I feel pretty strongly about it, and I think that it comes across.
Yeah. So Dr. Axe, we're talking so much about food and how you can change your diet, but your new book, Eat Dirt, talks about getting dirty, playing outside. What does that mean exactly, to eat dirt or to incorporate more dirt into your life? Because I think it sounds like, how could that be good?
Sure. Well, yeah, one of the things that's happened really in the last 100 years is we've really had this shift towards anti-germs, anti-dirt, and it saved a lot of lives at first, but we kind of swung this pendulum too far in the other direction of thinking that all bacteria is bad. And obviously at this point, everybody's heard of the benefits of taking probiotics. One of the things we don't realize is not only that there are other probiotics, but there are pro-viruses, there are pro-fungi, there are pro-yeast. We need to get more organisms, or more what I call micro-exposures, on a regular basis, and we've kind of isolated ourselves in these clean bubbles to where we don't get these exposures. And we're really supposed to be connected with the earth. We're supposed to be connected with our environment, and when we block ourselves off, it will make us sick. And so one of the other things that happens through this age of antibiotics today, that's probably one of the #1 reasons. I had a family practice in Nashville and took care of so many kids who would come into my practice, and I would say one of the #1 causes of them being ill, especially kids with things like eczema, some learning disorders and other issues, were the repercussions of taking prescription antibiotics would affect them in a very negative manner. And so what we know now is that, Hippocrates said over 2,000 years ago, all disease begins in the gut. And as Dr. Kelly mentioned earlier, we know that our microbiomes, so essentially our digestive tracts that are filled with trillions of different types of microorganisms and bacteria, are essential to our health. And gut health is connected to the health of our brain, to the health of our thyroid, to the health of our joints. And so we really, most of us really need to replenish the good bacteria and really get rid of some of that bad bacteria, the conditions typically often referred to as dysbiosis within our gut, and really work on balancing things out. And typically when people hear that, they think essentially of a food like yogurt or a probiotic supplement like Lactobacillus acidophilus or something like that. But we really don't just need food-based probiotics. Now that's a big part, that's an essential part. But also in many cases we need what are known as transient probiotics, or in ways soil-based organisms on a regular basis in our diet. So when I talk about eat dirt, it's getting these beneficial exposures, and there are several great studies proving this. There was a study not too long ago that was published where they found that children that grew up on farms were much healthier than children who didn't, or at least they had lesser cases of allergies. Another study found that if you have a dog or cat, if you have a dog, your chance of having asthma or allergies goes down by 52%. If you had a cat, down by 48%. And so we're finding, and let me kind of explain why that is, and then I'll talk about a few other things. But when we are, I've actually got a dog. I actually hated dogs for the longest time, and I married a woman who loves dogs, and so now I guess I love dogs. But I take my dog firstly out for a walk in the morning. He gets dirty, and I brush him off, and I tell him when we're bringing him in the house, and I'm getting all the dirt off him, I say, thanks, Ugly, for boosting my immune system, because when he's running around getting all dirty, he's exposing me to more pollen and to more dirt, more things in my environment, which naturally over time can actually support and boost the immune system. And one of the ways this works too, I'll use honey as an example. Many of us have heard that, how many of you guys have heard that honey can help allergies, right? So we've heard that raw local honey helps allergies. Well, raw local honey contains typically about 200 different types of microbes and pollen. And so what happens is when you get sick, it's not necessarily the best time to take honey. I mean, a little raw local honey might help, but ideally you're consuming a teaspoon or so of raw local honey every day over a year period of time, and essentially you are, you're educating your immune system in a way to where when you get that onslaught, like in the spring, this time of year in the fall, your body is more prepared to deal with that onslaught. If you think about it like this as well, my in-laws actually just took their 30th wedding anniversary down to Cancun, and they're not drinking the water. And I've been to Mexico, I don't drink the water either, but everyone in Mexico is drinking the water and they're fine. Why is that? Well, it's this immunity that they are gaining through these micro exposures over time. And so what we really do to ourselves through being being anti-germ, antibacterial to a fault, we're killing off many of these, or at least a lot of the diversity of microbes in our gut and weakening our immune system. So, and I could talk for an entire hour about that, but I don't know all the time. So anyway, just a few different ways to eat dirt. I mean, having a pet, having your own garden is a great way. We're finding that soil-based organisms, or these soil-based probiotics, they don't necessarily live in your system as much as food-based do. They're transit, they pass through you, but they're still responsible for very important immune functions. Like I said, raw honey, having a pet, even swimming in the ocean. In fact, the ocean is the largest body of viruses in the entire world, but beneficial viruses called bacteriophages. And so, anyways, there's a lot to talk about there. But just
so let me ask you, so you're talking about how great probiotics are, but like explain this in not doctor speak.
Sure.
What are ways that, how can you see benefits on a day-to-day, like is it less inflammation? Is it more energy? Like,
Sure.
Talk about like ways that you could actually see benefits.
Sure. Well, this might dig into a little bit more in terms of a condition I talked about in my book called leaky gut. But one of the things that happens is in order to have a healthy ecology in your gut, and just a few other factors here. I mean, your gut is responsible for so many things, and I see this in practice. I know that Dr. Jeff and Dr. Kelly practice this way as well in a lot of cases, but if all disease begins in the gut, then I really believe all health begins in the gut as well, or at least much of health. And so when I have a patient that comes in with a thyroid condition like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I typically don't just start treating the thyroid. I typically start by just radically changing their diet and really trying to balance out the microbes in the gut and lift up the good bacteria. Your gut essentially acts as a net, and certain things should pass through, certain things should be kept out. Well, what happens over time through intestinal inflammation is there's something called junctions that can open up or become more permeable to where certain things pass through. So gluten, that's why gluten is a problem. It causes intestinal inflammation. Over time, it can pass in the bloodstream, causing inflammation throughout your body. And oftentimes, it can cause an autoimmune reaction, even start targeting the thyroid, or your body starts attacking its own tissue like the thyroid. And so essentially, one of the most important things you can do to start is work on healing and sealing your gut lining, and then balancing out the microbes in your gut. Because if you have too much bad bacteria, certain types of pathogenic or bad bacteria can actually start to literally create toxins that eat away at holes in your gut lining, versus probiotics actually help protect your gut lining. And many probiotics even produce nutrients like vitamin B12 and vitamin K2, and they actually are important for absorption of vitamin minerals and important for intestinal repair and many things like that. So anyways, that might have been too science again, but just again, it's, your really health starts in your gut. Even hormone production, we're finding now that 95% of your body's serotonin is produced in your gut. I mean, that's known as your good mood hormone, or if you get a runner's high, you feel euphoric. It's just all those things there. So, anyways, yeah.
Yeah.
Could I make a quick comment?
Yeah, please.
So, I think there's another, Josh, you did a superb job of covering a wide body of information there very quickly, but I want to point out that this complex environment we have in the gut is really a fascinating part of our cellular body's chemistry that's unique to every individual. So the gut bacteria or the fecal community or the microbiome of one may not be exactly the same as another for promoting health in that person. So there's not a one-size-fits-all. Let me give you a quick example. In the 1980s, I had the opportunity, was in Australia, to meet a researcher who was studying asthma and allergies in children, atopy as it's called, in children. And he found that in indigenous populations, as he traveled the world, that atopy, these conditions that we see frequently in the Western world, were not seen in these indigenous cultures, be it Africa or be it New Zealand or Australia. And he started to study it. He found out that, lo and behold, it had something to do with worms. That's another part of our intestinal community. These were small, not the big tapeworms, but these are little small worms that are non-infected worms. And so he got very interested in this and started to study what would be in these worms that would prevent these kids from getting allergies, atopy, and eczema. And he found that on the surface of worms, if you've ever felt a big worm, you know, it has a slimy substance. And that slimy substance is a certain kind of chemical that actually interacts with our immune system in our gut to smooth it out, to quiet it down. And therefore you start saying, well, could you actually harness that to be a medical therapy? Could you give people specific types of non-infective spores of worms to actually treat autoimmune disease or treat inflammatory disease? And the answer is yes. In fact, there are over 2,200 references in the peer-reviewed medical literature, if you do a PubMed search, that you'll find on helminth therapy, giving people intentionally worms, just as there is by what's called fecal transplant, giving the bacteria from healthy people by enema to an unhealthy person and having their Crohn's disease or their inflammatory bowel disease go away, or their Clostridium difficile, which is a major problem in hospital infections. So this construct that Josh is talking about has tremendous importance, but it's only part of the constellation of things that diet and lifestyle can bring to create health out of a person who is laboring because they got the mismatch between their genes and their environment.
Okay, thank you. So I think that sometimes when you're in this wellness world, you kind of live in a bubble and think that everybody knows how to do the things that you know how to do because you've been doing them for so long. So if people are at, let's just like step one, I kind of want you, I want you all to answer maybe your top 2 things that when people get home, whenever they get home from South by Southwest, 2 things that they could do, and it's like just baby steps. What would you say, Kelly, your top 2 things they could do? I know you have like 5.
I know. Like, I'm in the top
But just
45.
something, an actionable thing that people can do when they get home.
Okay, I would say, I'm just going to give one assignment. How about
Yeah,
that?
please.
One assignment is check out how many packages you have in your kitchen.
Okay.
Because when I was transitioning from my conventional mindset to wherever I landed now, I thought I knew what processed food was, and I thought that's what like other people ate, you know, junk food or whatever. But in fact, we're all eating it. And even when you transition to sort of gluten-free eating, of course, we're all familiar with the pitfalls of transitioning, into sort of more restricted diets, that you can end up really amplifying your healthy junk food, right? So to identify a processed food, check out how many packages you have at home that have more than, let's say, 3 ingredients in them, or that really are more than just a container for whatever is inside. If there's, peas inside or rice inside or whatever in the package, just survey it, because the first step to transformation is really awareness, right? So the more you can sort of take a look and see, wow, I have a lot of stuff to throw out before I get on the Dr. Focus diet, then, you're sort of in the mindset of awareness. So I would say that's the number 1 thing.
So really label reading is so huge. So
Yeah, and when label reading gets really easy is when there are no labels to
Right. What about you, Dr. Bland?
Well, mine is, in the functional medicine parlance, we have what we call the 7 key physiological processes, and that's what we train doctors how to understand and to assess in their patients. So of those 7, is there one more important than the other? And the answer is, well, it depends on the person, doesn't it? So I'm going to select one out of the 7 that I think generally is an agent of change in all people that undergo it. And when we started talking about it, it seemed very controversial. It seemed way out there, just like when we first coined the term leaky gut, which we did in 1982, and we were excoriated by the gastrointestinal gastroenterologists of the world that said there's no such thing. Now they're using it frequently in their literature. But anyway, this concept is called detoxification. And how do you do detoxification? Well, you basically go on a clean diet, right? And you get rid of high fructose corn syrup sweeteners, you get rid of stimulants, you get rid of food additives, food colorings, you go to your basic clean protein, you go away from processed white flour and sugar. And there are many different programs that people have to implement it. Probably every author that's written books in the nutrition area in the last few years has a detoxification program. However it's implemented, within 10 days to 2 weeks of introducing that program, most people will come out of the clouds. They'll have clarity, they'll get rid of brain fog, they'll have better digestion, they'll sleep better, their sore joints and muscles will improve, and they'll go, wow, I didn't even know I could feel like this. I was been told it's because I was getting older. I didn't think I was getting that old. And now suddenly you kind of turn the clock back. So that construct of detoxification and how it's applied and how that affects the liver's ability to process and get rid of junk, because we're all carrying junk around because we live in a world with 100,000 chemicals that have been introduced over the last 50 years. How we do that is probably depending on the individual and whose advice you choose. But I can tell you, having studied this and published many papers on it over the last 30 years, this really works. So that's where I would kind of start.
Okay, how about you?
I would say to start, one of the things I have my patients do in terms of some baby steps to get started is just change breakfast. I mean, for a lot of people, I know that changing their entire diet can seem overwhelming. But if you think about it, for most people, if you just change your breakfast, you're changing 33% of your diet. I mean, that's kind of a giant leap forward. So I think trying to do a really healthy smoothie for breakfast is a great thing to do. Every morning I wake up and I'll have a smoothie and I'll put in coconut milk. I'll do some berries, typically like blueberries, a little bit of cinnamon. I typically do a type of protein powder called collagen protein, which I think is great, very easy to digest. And just something really simple like that, I think, is a great thing for people to do, a great place to start. And then one other thing that I think is good as well, one of the things that I found over the years with patients is that oftentimes we have these things that we love. Like for me, like growing up, like I loved peanut butter. I loved Reese's peanut butter cups, and to give those up, that sounds like the worst thing that would want to be. So when I read an article somewhere years ago that peanut butter isn't the best for you because of omega-6 fats and the processing and mold and a number of other things, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing in the world. But you know what? I found a healthy food swap, and I started doing things like almond butter. And at first I'm like, this isn't the same, but over time I ended up liking it more. So I just encourage you. You can probably find resources online. I know that Dr. Jeff and Dr. Kelly have fantastic websites that you can check out.
Well, you're 6 million views a month, so
yeah. And I probably have some on my site too. But I would just look up something like a food placement list or a food swap list. And just start making those simple food swaps. So switching from the vegetable oil to the coconut oil, or even grass-fed butter and something called ghee is fantastic, and switching out the white flour and doing sprouted grain flours or coconut and almond flour. And today, and one of the great things is there are so many resources today. I remember even 7-8 years ago, or when I was about to graduate 8 or 9 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of good healthy cookbooks out there. Today, you could drown in healthy cookbooks. I mean, there's like 50 million paleo cookbooks out there. So anyways, I would just say, try and find those easy, just change your breakfast, find some easy food swaps, and that's a great place to start.
Well, I have a million questions, but does anyone else have questions that you want to ask? Oh, yeah, okay, cool.
I kind of have, so I'll just make them really quick. Is homeopathy in the realm of what you guys consider legitimate?
The question is homeopathy something that you guys consider in the range?
Does everyone know what the word homeopathy means? How many people are familiar with the term homeopathy? Okay, that's a pretty good number. So homeopathy is built around the principle of what is in the scientific parlance of today called hormesis. Hormesis is an interesting term. It basically means that an unexpected high output of function occurs, or effect occurs, from a very small amount of exposure of something. And if you think of immunization, that would be kind of an example sometimes of hormesis, where you use a small amount to kill something, a virus, and then it has a very large effect on our immune system to influence the memory against that infection for the rest of our lives, hopefully. But hormesis can work both ways. It can work good and bad, because the bad part of hormesis is you could be exposed to something in a small level that had a big adverse effect, like created inflammation. It could be something like peroxidized lipids or rancid fats that could do that. But hormesis can also have a very positive effect in that it can stimulate what we call increased function over the course of exposure. The difficulty with homeopathy, I think, is that there are different levels of potency, as you know. The more diluted potencies are the higher activities, but you eventually get to a dilutional effect that is so statistically dilute that you don't even have anything left of what you started with. And you say, well, how did that work at all? So I think there's still some debate about what is the mechanism of action, but there is no question that hormesis, a small amount of a something, can have a bigger effect than expected. Like eating a cruciferous vegetable with a little bit of glucosinolates might have a much bigger effect on your hormones than you ever expected. One serving of Brussels sprouts, that's a hormetic effect, right? Because it's not a pharmacological effect. So the question is, how dilute is good? So I think that's where the controversy lies.
Okay, let me ask you a question back. When you said homeopathy, can you give me an example of what in your head that means, in terms of like an example of somebody taking something or doing something?
I first learned about this when I was driving down to Florida on a all-night drive, and I was getting a cold. I stopped in some small store, and they had these little tiny pills. Never heard of it before, and it was a placebo. First of all, I have no idea how you would ever know if this was an authentic thing or someone just made it in their kitchen, and sold it. Because they're not really tested, these things. So how do you?
Yeah, and I think it really depends. I mean, one of the problems are there. I mean, almost anybody can put out a supplement. I mean, it's really not that difficult to do and sell it. I think homeopathics, as Dr. Jeff was saying, they can be great and not so great. I think working with a practitioner who really has studied this and knows it is very effective. I know for myself, like the past many years, I've studied a lot of Chinese medicine and worked with a lot of herbalists. And when somebody when you come across a talented practitioner, I mean, they're really going to know how to use those things. But I mean, it's a tough. Do I?
Personally, do you use them?
I do.
Yes, I do. Yes.
So you know of a clinic or lab that is tested and they are standardized in some.
Yeah, the one you got was probably Ocelonarinum, which is made by a company that is one of the respectable homeopathic medicament companies. There's 3 or 4 that are German-based and have a long history of many, many decades of producing Hahnemann certified homeopathic. So you want to stay with one of the major leading companies.
Okay, next question. If you have a question, if you want to walk up to the mic, we can do a little nice order.
Hey guys, my name's Jeff. We've all heard the expression, you are what you eat. And a lot of people now will say you are what you ate. So can you talk a little bit more about the assimilation process of food becoming you from the source of where your food came from and the diets that the source of the food ate, and then maybe just in layman's terms, talk a little bit more about gene expression as well.
Well, Jeff, being a namesake of yours, I'm totally on board with you here. We're not what we eat. We're what we eat, digest, absorb, assimilate, transport, deliver, cellularly uptake, and then affect our gene expression pathways. That's what we are. And that is the new medicine of today. That's also the new nutritional science of today. Unfortunately, many of the nutrition textbooks that people are studying out of in their dietetics training still doesn't have this information properly incorporated because of the reason that Kelly was talking about. It takes long to get these into practice. But the point that you're making, I think, is really the key point, that really what we're eating when we eat highly processed food is not just the processed ingredients themselves, it's the whole chemistry and the physical nature of the food that affects digestion and assimilation. So when you start compounding stuff to make it shelf stable so it'll sit around for several decades and no respectable bug can live in it, that has something to do with how it's going to be affecting your body, right? And you know the old Twinkie experiment, right, where it was put on the shelf and then it came back to, I think it was 25 years later, and opened up, it was still fresh. So, you really don't want Twinkies living in your body for 25 years. You want to digest, assimilate, metabolize, and excrete. And I think that those principles, because we grew up on food, we have a long evolutionary history. So minimally processed, organically grown, not overly chemicalized. That leads, and by the way, this gets into raw versus cooked. And I think in general, kind of modest cooking, because you not only kill the bacteria on the surface of food, but it also kind of breaks down some of the cell walls in plants, so it's more digestible, like vitamin A or carotene is more readily available from cooked carrots than from raw carrots. So I think that these are principles of good nutrition that are time tested and led to the survival of our species. And why do we think we're so smart that we should change this today? They're really the ways that we should be living.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say this as well. When we're talking about something like, I've heard that principle, you are what you eat what they ate. And, when you look at kind of giving two examples of cattle today, you have one cow that consumes grasses and feeds on, spring water. And so we know that they're high in omega-3 fats and CLA and other things that really can support the body. Versus today, you look at our average cattle today, first thing they do, they're stuffed full of GMO corn and grains, really fattened up. So that's going to give them much higher levels of fats that are going to become inflammatory because it's going to throw your omega-3, omega-6 ratio off. But then on top of that, if we're talking about other livestock, oftentimes they hardly see the sun, they're not getting vitamin D, that's affecting their hormones in ways. And the other thing, when you look at animal processing today, it's one of the scariest things. It's something that I don't really see a lot of people talking about, but most cattle today, a lot of them are electrocuted to death, some are killed through shotgun method. There's a lot of different ways that these animals are slaughtered. And typically this is more, some of it see as a religious practice, but when an animal is killed kosher, which is slicing it right there in the throat, they die immediately, versus these other ways they're killing animals today actually releases certain types of adrenaline and hormones into their tissues at that time as well. So there are a number of differences between a chicken that's actually stuck in a cage this big, never sees the sun, they fatten up so much in 8 weeks, do hormones that they fall over. So anyways, you are what you eat what they ate, or how their lifestyle or what they go through. And I think it's absolutely true. And there are probably a lot of things we don't even realize in terms of health effects that affect us and the way we treat at least our livestock.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for that question.
Hi, so you all have talked a lot about diet, so I wanted to do some Mythbusters, fact or fiction, because there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So gluten and dairy, I feel like this is two topics that I've seen a lot of conflicting information, as well as have spoken to my doctors, and no one has been able to give me a straight answer, so I would love to hear gluten and dairy.
I feel like we have to do rapid fire, like each person can give one sentence about gluten and dairy.
Okay, one sentence. I'm not sure there is a more powerful way to clear the slate, because it's extremely hard to procure and prepare unprocessed dairy and gluten, right? They almost always are by definition processed. So if you eliminate those from your diet, not only are you eliminating potentially what are called antigenic proteins, like stimulatory proteins, but you're also by default eliminating a lot of these processed foods. So forget what your doctor says and just try it.
Yeah, gluten I think is a placeholder for a whole series of funny proteins, as Kelly was saying, and it's not always gluten. There are non-gluten specific problems that people have that create what they look like to be gluten problems, but it's not gluten in and of itself. So I think it comes with a processed diet, it comes with hybridization of grains, it comes with the nature of chemicalizing our environment.
Yeah, I'm going to try and keep this real short. I'm going to keep it 1 minute here. My perspective is very in line with what they're sharing, is that if somebody asked me and I had to give a yes or no answer, is dairy and wheat healthy? It's absolutely no today. Most people should not be consuming them. However, if they're cooked traditionally as they're taught in Chinese medicine and more of a traditional diet, we're not talking about apples to apples here. When we're talking about the wheat we have today that's so high in gluten, or even as Dr. Jeff is talking about, not just that, just generally grains, they're very hard to break down. But if things are broken down through lacto-fermentation and sprouting, completely broken down like they should be, it actually becomes much easier to digest, and I think it wouldn't be as big of a problem today. But I think for the average person, going completely dairy-free and gluten-free for a time being is a really effective thing to do.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, this is a little bit like those. So I guess I want to say that, like off the bat, like I absolutely agree with like all the stuff you guys were saying, like the basic principles, eat real, fresh, all that stuff. But particularly with food, people lie to us all the time, right? Like we thought low fat was the greatest thing for a very long time, and we know that's not true now. But that said,
No, we didn't.
okay,
There are those of us that for 30 years have been saying other things. I just want to put that out there.
But that said, I mean, me and my girlfriend get in arguments all the time, and she's like, "Oh, you should be soaking your almonds to get the things out of them." And I'm like, "Well, there's no like I've looked up research on coconut milk and coconut oil, like, and maybe like it is good, but like there's not enough primary articles about it to justify like me using a bunch of coconut oil." So anyway, like it can drive you mad trying to do the right thing. And so then you come to talks like this, and you talk to smart people, and they say, well, you know, things about your CLAs and your omega balance, and it all sounds wonderfully confusing, and I don't believe it because I don't know what else to do. But that leads me to the question, which is, like, a lot of this, like, you could have been up there and said any other utterances, and I just would have been like, okay, I guess that's probably true. So, like, what can we do, like, what can you guys do, or what can we do, either to self-educate in a meaningful way about having to go get, a bunch of degrees, or, to really say, like, when we talk to people, not just repeating what you say, but really understanding it.
Can I say one thing about that? I mean, I think that for myself,